the best of money matters. Under the radar.
You're listening to Money FM 89.3, and it's now time for a special episode of Under the Radar with me, Chua Tian Tian. Now, we've taken you through the ins and outs of over 300 companies globally over the past 2 years, and that is almost one company every 1 or 2 working days, rain or shine. But there is one company that we have not talked about all this time, and yes, that is the company behind our radio station, Money FM 89.3. I am talking about the Singapore Press Holdings, or more specifically, what's now known as SPH Media. Now, with its legacy tracing back to the years 1845 and 1923, with the first runs of the English daily, the Straits Times, as well as the predecessor of Chinese newspaper Lianhe Zaobao, SPH Media is a leading media group with operations in publishing print and digital newspapers, magazines, and books. Now, the firm started out as SPH Limited back in August 1984, where it brought together newspaper brands from 2 companies, namely the Straits Times Press Group and the Singapore News and Publications Limited, as well as 2 other publishing, production, and distribution companies called Times Publishing and Singapore Newspaper Services. Now, the mission is to be the trusted source of news on Singapore and Asia, and to represent the communities that make up Singapore and to connect them to the world. Over 4 decades have passed since, and the business has now expanded to also own and operate radio stations and outdoor media, including right here, Money FM 89.3. But really, why are we speaking to SPH Media, you might ask? Well, we want to find out how SPH Media is preparing for the future as media companies around the world transform their century-old business models in a digital world. We also want to talk about the rise in news consumption through social media platforms and what that means for traditional media. Also on the agenda, how the rise in social media usage changes the way mainstream media outlets create, promote, and distribute their news stories. Well, joining me right here in the studio is Chan Yeng, CEO of SPH Media. Yeng, welcome.
Thank you, Tian Tian.
So excited for this conversation, close to our hearts indeed. Yeng, we've briefly talked about SPH Media as a leading, or in fact one of Asia's largest media groups. It now also operates, besides publishing print and digital newspapers, we've got magazines, radio stations, including Money FM. But let's hear from you. How would you define SPH Media's value proposition, business model, as well as positioning?
Well, I see SPH Media as the national news company, for want of a better term. If you are in the UK, for example, if you are British, I think what comes to mind when I look at national news companies, BBC. Similarly, in Singapore, I believe that for most people, when they think about news, they think about our titles, whether it's Straits Times, Zaobao, and our vernacular titles. I look at SPH Media, if I may use SPH for short. The greatest value proposition for us, I think, is credibility, trust. I've mentioned in other platforms before that we are in a post-truth world, a post-literate world, post-truth world in particular, where when I look around the world and I look at other supposedly news media outlets and the kind of information they put out, some people call it alternative facts, some people call it various descriptors and adjectives, but essentially truth has become quite a precious commodity. I personally encountered this in my previous life. I was with Ministry of Health, you're probably aware, during the COVID period, and I recall we had to fight a lot of misinformation, disinformation, just plain basic untruths. And very often, even for the chat groups that I'm involved in with schools, with friends and so on, when someone posts something that's untrue, someone else would post something else, usually from one of our titles, Straits Times, Zaobao, and almost inevitably it shuts up the rest in terms of what is untrue out there. So this is something which I think really is key for SPH Media going forward.
Back to SPH Media's mission to be the trusted source of news on Singapore and Asia, and really to represent the communities that make up Singapore and to connect them to the world. Well, brand-wise, Yeng, if we look at SPH Media, it boasts a portfolio of 40 news and lifestyle brands. It's more notably known, of course, for the newspaper titles, the Straits Times, Lianhe Zaobao, Business Times, Berita Harian, Tamil Merasu, and Shinmin Daily. But there are other magazines and radio stations, including Money FM. So how would you segment about the various brands, who are the target consumers under the brands, and consequently, what are the prerogatives for the various titles?
Well, you can segment the audience by various means. The most obvious is probably our language group. So we cover not just English, we cover all the... In fact, we are the only major mainstream news company that have full-fledged products for our 3 official mother tongue languages. So we have Berita Harian for Malay, we have Tamil Merasu for the Indian community, and we have both Zaobao as well as Xingming. These are the mainstream newspapers. Of course, we have radio stations as well, we have magazines, as you have pointed out. By language, obviously, you can look at the population and then you try to cater for different communities' interests. You can, and we should, and we do, also segment by topics, by interest. So obviously, even for news, there's what I call serious news and light news. There are people who consume serious news. They read our commentaries, our opinion pieces from first word to last word. We love those audience. But obviously not everyone is interested in serious news all the time. They want to know what's going on in the world. They want to know what's going on in Singapore. But they don't need full page articles on just one topic. They want to get a sense of what's going on. And that's where we also target at what I would call the lighter news readers. We curate topics of interest to them. We curate news that's happened in the last, in fact, ongoing. If you go to the digital app, it will be ongoing news. If you look at our print newspaper, then we select and we curate news that we think will be of interest, that is important that they are aware of. Then obviously we also have other news. We have information, current affairs. We have our magazines, for example, we cover entertainment. Even Straits Times have a live section that covers entertainment. So essentially what we want to do is to be relevant to all our audience. Depending on how you look at different segments of audience, we target at their interests and hopefully we meet their needs. One important area which I think we have done well in, I hope we'll continue to do well in, is providing insights. Obviously, when you report on news, you can just report factually what has happened. In many news publications overseas, sometimes they add on a lot of their opinion. We try as far as possible for a news piece to be factual and objective. But even then, how you connect the dots, events that's happening in the US, for example, between US and Europe, some of the events happening in our part of the world in Asia, many of these events are connected. And how our journalists able to help to connect, make sense for our readers, for our audience, makes a lot of difference. So the insights as well as the connection, make sure that it's relevant to their daily lives.
I see. Well, Yeng, let's take a look at where things are at for SPH Media. The firm had in December 2021 announced the completion of the media restructuring exercise with SPH Limited and the transfer of its media-related business to SPH Media Trust. And the key reason back then for the media restructuring was to allow SPH Media to grow without the profit-driven pressures of a publicly listed entity. Some 3 years down the road, Yeng, how are things coming along and what are your top 3 key priorities right now?
Well, maybe if I can just clarify your point about without the pressures of being profit-driven. I think in any organization, any company, whether you're a CLG or a listed company, finances are always important. Without financing, without revenues, you can't do anything. So whether it's profit-driven or not, we continue to have to look at being commercially viable and making sure that essentially we can make ends meet. So I just want to clarify that part. But importantly, priorities, there are multiple priorities. If I have to distill down to 3, I think number 1 priority will always be the audience. Because ultimately, what we produce, whether it's news, whether it's information, radio programs, for example, like the one we are doing down here, ultimately it's for the audience. If we are not able to give the audience what they are interested in, if we are not able to provide the audience that value add compared to all the other information that they can find out there, we won't exist. They will not consume our products and there's no reason for us to exist. So audience is primary. We continue to have to look at what audience preferences are, whether it's in terms of, I mentioned about serious news, light news, is constantly evolving. Audience preference in terms of the platforms that they use. In the past, printed newspapers, almost every household have one. You can rely on that. Today, there are many platforms that are out there. Some serious, some less serious. You have social media, lots of choices. I don't like to use that term alternative media, alternative news, but some people call it by that. You have those choices as well for those who are not too bothered about the veracity of the information behind what is reported. So these are all the things that we have to look at. You also have different types of formats. You have video, you have audio, you have print, whether print is in digital or on paper. So again, preference of the audience is important. Second and third priority, I wouldn't rank them because both are equally important.
Yeah.
I would say partners. By partners, that would also include advertisers. They are the ones who, I mentioned about revenues earlier on, they are the ones who help bring in revenues. We earn revenues from subscriptions, but we get a lot of revenues from advertisements that help the products going. We are also quite selective. We, rightly or wrongly, we won't take any advertisement from just anyone. We are quite selective in terms of what they are advertising, as well as the quality of the companies that are advertising as well. And I think it works well for both of us. We see them as partners and not just customers. At least I see them as partners, because in the process of their advertising with us, we are also helping them to convey messages. And whether it's about a product, whether it's about a service, this is quite key, and I hope the partnership is something that we'll continue to work on. Last but not least, that's why I didn't want to rank them, our own staff. Ultimately, any organization, any company, you can have the hardware, you can have radio towers, you can have printing machines, IT equipment networks, but ultimately it's about the people. So the people who produce the content that we put out, the publications that we put out, the people who support all of this, whether it's in the back room, whether it's at the front, they are quite critical. One of the things I feel very grateful and very heartened about, I've been in SPH for just over half a year. We recently did an employee engagement survey. The first time we did a company-wide survey since the restructuring. And one of the survey items was about a sense of mission, sense of purpose, and whether our staff feel that they are making a difference. I must say I'm very heartened, among the highest scores. So the people that we have with us, whether it's a journalist, whether it's people in the back room that's supporting the journalists, they understand what the mission is. They understand that they are serving a larger purpose than just reporting just a job. And this, I think, what will bring us forward. But it's important to continue to make sure that our people feel engaged, that they feel they have the tools and they have this strong sense of mission that will bring them forward.
And just a curious question, since you brought it up earlier, you mentioned that you don't like to call, lack of better words, the alternative media platforms alternative media. Why is that the case? And if so, how do you assess competition in this media landscape?
I must say I'm quite puzzled. Again, if I draw from previous experience, whether from Ministry of Health, which is the most recent, or even before that. So during COVID, there are people who just make all kinds of claims without any evidence, any backing at all, and it's just their view. But they do it well because they speak well, they put a lot of emotion in it. They try to target whether it's anxieties or fears of unknown in others, but without a single shred of evidence, make all sorts of claims. That's why I hesitate to use the term news or even media to call them, but this is where I believe in my mission, and I believe that my colleagues in SPH believe in the same mission as well. So I mentioned about post-truth world. We have been, and I would like to think that we will continue to be, that source where, when in doubt, when the public, when Singaporeans, they need to know what is true, what is not true, what's going on, they will come to us to verify minimally.
Now, let's take a look at how SPH Media is really preparing itself for the future, Yeng, and appreciate it if we could take some time to look at the evolution of print media. Because in 2021, we saw how Lianhe Zaobao, the evening papers, merged with its evening counterpart Xinmin Daily News, and that's amid SPH Media's digitalization push. And if we were to turn back time, right, SPH Media was at the forefront of digitalization, with the Business Times being the first English newspaper in Asia to go online in January 1994. That was before I was born. And Lianhe Zaobao becoming the first Chinese newspaper in the world to go online in August 1995. The question now here is, how would you assess the success of SPH Media's digitalization initiatives and the adoption of digital copies at this point in time?
Well, I think in terms of the digital journey, I use the term journey because there's no endpoint. As we progress in terms of use of technology, leveraging on digital media, the horizon would move. And it's something that we will continue to have to look at what the technology allows for, look at what the audience prefers. I would say that we have come quite a long way, but as I've said, there's no endpoint. It sounds a bit pessimistic, but it's never ending.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also have optimism because the digital media allows for a lot of possibilities that the old print media doesn't allow for and couldn't allow for, whether it's in terms of speed, in terms of our ability to put things out very quickly. In a printed newspaper, you have a maximum limit, typically about 52, 56 pages.
Yeah.
In digital media, it's unlimited. I have plenty of server space, so not a problem. It's a question of interest. So we are also able to target interest a bit better. In the digital realm, similarly, you can have things that are a lot more customized. So I mentioned about topics, that we segment audience into topics. Again, in the old format on print, there's only that many pages I can allocate to, say, live or to the money section of Straits Times. But on digital, again, if there's a lot of interest in, entertainment news for that week, there's, again, no limit. So I think there's a lot of possibilities. Ultimately, user preferences will evolve, platforms will evolve, and it's for us to keep up with it. I think there's also very often I'm asked between print and digital. I personally think it's a false dichotomy. It's not mutually exclusive. Even in digital, you have different digital platforms. Our digital app, for example, for our news apps, whether it's Straits Times or Zaobao, is very different from a social media app. So if I use Straits Times as an example, we have, of course, a digital media app. It's slightly different from the website we have simply because of different formats that's used. Straits Times has a Telegram channel, we have a WhatsApp channel, we are on Facebook, we are on YouTube, and each of these are quite different. You can call them digital, but they're quite different. Even between Instagram and TikTok, for example, a TikTok video is very different from an Instagram video. I think all of us who have used this before, we know.
Yes.
So it's not between print and digital. It's really about what are the platforms our audience prefer to use and what platforms they are on, and how do we use those platforms to reach out to them in a more effective way. I am, in particular, quite conscious our mother tongue language products, Zaobao Xingming for Chinese, Tamil Rasu, as well as Berita Harian, about, if I look at circulation numbers, about 2/3 of our circulation are still hard copy print.
Wow.
Largely because many of these audience that are reading our vernacular products, they are in the older age groups. My mum, for example, reads Zaobao. I'm sorry to say, I couldn't convert her to digital. She doesn't like a tablet. Obviously, she doesn't want to read from a phone. So there are seniors who prefer paper products, and I think we ought to cater to their needs. So between print and digital, as I've said, it's not about print versus digital. It's really about what our audience prefers. If you ask me whether print will eventually die, in 50 years' time, I would say very, very, very likely. 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, I don't know. Ultimately, what we will do in SPH, we will look at what our audience prefers, and we will, as far as possible, as far as the finances allow us to do it, cater to their needs, cater to their preferences.
And that actually brings us to the next question, which is how a report published by the Reuters Institute of Study of Journalism back in June 2024, it noted that online and social media, they remain the most common ways of accessing news, while both TV and print, they have declined significantly over the past few years. But what is also notable here is that most people surveyed in the report, they do not pay for news when they consume it through digital means as well. So question then for you, Yeng, is the adoption rate of our SPH Media, digital newspapers, digital magazines, is that enough to allow SPH Media to gradually become a fully digital media group in maybe next 30 years, 50 years? And how important for us then is it to still retain the infrastructure, that supply chain for printing newspapers and distributing physical newspapers?
So for now, our print revenues and print-related revenues still make up more than half of our total revenues. Still an important element. I mentioned earlier on, ultimately revenues aside, is about what our audience prefers. If our audience prefers to read hard copy news, for so long as there's a big enough critical mass, I think we should serve them. Quite frankly, from a finances point of view, it's much cheaper for me to serve a digital subscriber than for me to serve a print subscriber. But as I've said, for as long as the finances allow us to do so, I think we should not ignore segments of society that prefer print. And I mentioned earlier on, many of our seniors, actually they prefer print. Even some of the younger ones, surprisingly, they like print as well.
The touch and feel of it.
Probably. So maybe it's like music. Vinyl is getting a comeback from among the young. But my approach to this is that what the audience prefers ought to be the primary factor to determine how we serve them. But that said, if you ask me 50 years down the road, I think the direction is inevitable. Just like for music, while vinyl is making a comeback, it's still very much niche. CDs as well is no longer what it used to be. CDs are actually digital. So when you talk about whether we are going to be digital, it'll be what form of digital. I think it's rather than digital as a very generic term. So I mentioned for music, CD is digital, but CD is also giving way to streaming. And after streaming, it'll be something else as well. So in our case, to me, it's always about keeping up, whether it's hard copy, print, digital, what forms of digital. In 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, for so long as we want to remain relevant, we have to keep up with the different forms of digital.
We talked about how the move towards becoming digital is inevitable in the longer run. But the question, though, is at this point in time, are consumers willing to pay for digital copies of our titles? And if not, does it warrant a tweak in our business model to focus more on advertising and other means of generating revenues?
I think globally for news organizations, even for advertising, the shift to digital revenues are coming under assault. I use a fairly strong term because it's not just us, but globally. Revenues from subscriptions, revenues from advertising. Subscriptions because there are a lot of alternative sources of information. I would call it sources of news, but sources of information. And some of the information better verified than others. In terms of advertisers, there's also many, many platforms. So in digital advertising, they don't need to go to news publications anymore. They can advertise directly. They have their own apps, etc. So this is something that will continue to happen. Looking for alternative sources of revenues will always be something that we need to do. Even if we are fully digital, I mentioned about different forms of digital.
Yeah.
I can have my app, I can have my website. I can even do it with the website and just have an app alone. But if people are consuming it on social media, what I can monetize on TikTok, for example, is very different from, say, advertisements. I can hardly get anything from there. It's very different from advertisers coming to my app. So it's not about digital per se, it's about platforms and how we find revenue opportunities for it. I guess that's also why, maybe to preempt a question that you may ask, public funding. We have been receiving public funding for the last few years. The other big mainstream news company, MediaCorp, CNA, they have been receiving actually they started off as a government department, so they have always been receiving government support. In our case, what it means is that government recognizes that news has become a public good, not very different from trees, parks, and so on, where it's something that society needs, but it may not be something that society individually are prepared to pay. So this helps very much, and we in SPH will continue to use funding from the government support as well as our own revenues to provide news information that's of high quality and credible to the audience that we serve.
Question over here, Yeng, what is next in SPH Media's journey to further digitalize in the coming years? How would you improve the distribution and also the consumption of news on SPH Media titles, both in terms of digital copies and print editions in the meantime?
Maybe if I start with print first, it's something we are looking at. We are still looking at the distribution mechanisms. I think we need to examine a lot more thoroughly. When I was young, we have all these street corners where the newspaper vendors sell mapibo and so on. Many of these don't exist anymore. There are still a few, but very rare. We now sell per copy. For non-subscribers, you can buy them from petrol stations, from convenience stores. We're looking at where else we might be able to make it more accessible. But print, I do recognize, it will be increasingly niche in the years to come. digital is where it's going to be important. But digital, similarly, it's not just about your app or your web. I think as a company, if I were to rewind the clock, I would probably try to make bigger bets in, say, social media or messaging apps and our presence in those places. But to be fair, as I mentioned earlier on, trying to make money on Facebook or make money on TikTok is not as easy as making money on your own digital app. So first thing is we need to be where our audience are. If they are on social media apps, we ought to be down there providing news information and hopefully being able to get them to come back to our app or website for more details or for more fleshed out insights. If they prefer formats like podcasts, for example, or like video clips and so on, we should be producing those as well, and not just expect that they would continue reading text and they enjoy reading text. So being multi-platform, being multi-format is something that we are going to make a big push in the coming few years.
Just a very curious question that popped up in my mind as you mentioned about the street vendors. In the print world and the physical world, we have the street vendors distributing the newspapers. So one can go to SPH and say, I want to subscribe a month's, a year's worth of newspapers, or you can go to the street vendors to buy them in a retail format. But in the digital world, aside from going to, let's say, BT, SD, going to our own apps, are there street vendors, lack of better words, in the digital world that we can partner up and work with? Can we sell our license to these players, for instance?
Actually, I see no reason why not. In fact, even our subscription front end is something which I have been talking to our tech people on. Is there any reason why we are not prepared to sell a single copy and instead require subscription, whether it's monthly, yearly, and so on? Some of this is happening. So our e-shop, we call it e-shop, our front end. You can buy single copies of certain publications we have. But by and large, I think our model is still very much based on the old model. You subscribe and then forever we hope forever you continue subscribing and you receive your whether it's hard copy newspaper or digital news on a daily basis. But I do think that with technology, there's no reason why we cannot be more customized and more flexible. In terms of selling our products on other platforms, we ought to be open to it as well. The desire, of course, is our own platforms. But as I've said earlier on, if our readers, our audience are already on other platforms, then maybe we should explore those platforms.
Okay, and Yeng, let's talk about the positioning of Money FM. If I could sidetrack something that's especially close to my heart as well, what would you say is the positioning of Money FM as a radio station?
Actually, this is something which I asked the head of radio when I first came in.
Yeah.
If you look at business-oriented products in the SPH family, SPH group, and I just leave it at for the English language products we have. Obviously, we also have Business Times. We have Straits Times Money Desk, and we have Money FM. I think first question we should ask ourselves, what audience are we targeting at? And whether there can be more synergies among the products that we already have. So at one extreme, you can target only the C-suite. Essentially, these are the business decision makers, top level decision makers. As you come down the hierarchy, I guess you can call it, then you have a C-1, C-2, you have the PMEBs, your professionals, managers, executives, and businessmen.
Yeah.
Then you have your SMEs, which are quite different from your big companies.
Yeah.
Their interest areas will be quite different. Their issues, their problems they face will be quite different. And then you really have the next level, which is mass. I call it the mass market.
Yeah.
Your man in the street, I use it very generally. I should say your person in the street, man in the street, woman in the street. Your youth, for whom money-related matters actually are of great interest. This thing about financial education, how do you manage your money? How do you, even scams and so on, for example, they're all related. So it's a very
wide
broad
spectrum.
That's right, very wide spectrum. This is an area which I have a small team looking at now for our business audience. I call it, and when I say business audience, I mean in a broader sense.
Yeah.
How should we best cater to their interests and their preferences? Should I segment it to become more niche, or should I go a bit more mass and cater to everyone? So hopefully in a year's time. Okay, to be frank, I gave a much shorter deadline to my team. Hopefully in a few months' time, we have a lot more clarity on this. Then we have to go and look at the process of how we target a different sub-segments of audience.
And given the niche audience that Money FM is targeting, and I would assume more on the PMEBs and maybe SMEs, corporate C-suite side, do you think there's reason for Money FM to maybe partner up with major podcast distributors like Spotify, Apple Podcasts? Can we also tie up with independent platforms or even airlines to sell the license to a Money FM podcast to drive greater reach and influence? Does it make business sense to do so, though?
As I mentioned earlier on, actually, I'm not averse to working with third parties. We have many partners we work with. Ultimately, it boils down to a question of terms and conditions. So when we put something on YouTube, for example, YouTube has certain terms and conditions about IP rights.
Yeah.
And when you put something on a platform where you lose your IP rights, then straight away you're in trouble. So intellectual property rights, who owns the copyright to whether it's podcasts, videos, etc. The other obviously is the revenues you get, whether they are prepared to pay, how much they're prepared to pay. But I think in principle there's no aversion to working with partners.
It's down to the specific and the fine print.
That's right.
I see. Now, if you're just tuning in, we're now in conversation with Chan Yeng, CEO of SPH Media. Well, Yeng, let's talk about how SPH Media is using its legitimacy and rich heritage to drive influence in a digital world. Because as a layman, one would assume, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that mainstream media outlets, they hold legitimacy given their rich heritage. And in the pre-social media era where media dissemination is centralized to major public or private media outlets, legitimacy drives influence. But anecdotally, we are seeing the two sort of decouple with the rise in social media. How would you assess SPH Media's legitimacy and influence right now? And what can we do now to use our legitimacy to drive greater influence?
Okay, I would not so much correct you, but I have a different way of viewing this. We guard our credibility, you call it legitimacy, very jealously. In my view, legitimacy is not claimed. I can claim to be legitimate, but it's earned. It's what our audience, our readers view us, and not whether we claim it otherwise. So whether it's a long heritage or not, actually ultimately it's how your audience view you. If I may use an example from the past, not Singapore example, so that we you're probably too young to remember. The Soviet Union used to have a newspaper called Pravda. Very long history. If I remember correctly, I think it was started in 1912. 1918, when the Soviet Union was officially formed, it became the official newspaper of the Communist Party of Soviet Union. Essentially, it became the newspaper for the whole Soviet Union. It eventually closed down in 1991, I think. You can do a search. I am not sure that everyone agrees that simply because it has a long heritage, long history, Pravda was credible. So I would say that legitimacy, credibility is earned. Okay. It's not something that is bestowed on you. And this is something we guard jealously, something that we work very hard to ensure that when someone comes to us, they know that they can trust us. You mentioned about influence. The way SPH has operated, I think it's a bit different. I hesitate to use that same term. I know what you mean. We do have a role as a national newspaper, but I would hesitate to say that it's our role to actively advocate on issues. There are some things that are quite motherhood. So things to do with national interests, nation building. I think courtesy being cleaning your tables after you have eaten at the food court and so on. Yeah. Some of these things are I think things that we ought to, as part of supporting society, help to advocate and influence. But on contentious issues, I would say that our job is not to influence. We are quite different from, say, newspapers in the Western world. When I look at the US, you have on two sides of the spectrum, you have Fox News, which is right-leaning conservative. You have New York Times, I would argue, is left-leaning liberal. They have certain views and certain positions that they would tend to advocate. In Singapore, we don't do that. At least SPH, we don't do active advocacy. What we should do and what we try to do is to make sure that we put out information to the public that's well-informed, that's objective and balanced enough, and ultimately for our public to make sense of it. Of course, from time to time, we will publish opinion pieces, commentaries, for which individual journalists or editors, they can express a view. But as a paper, I would I would draw a line in active advocacy to try to influence society on issues that are contentious. Ultimately, it's for society to decide. We are not elected in any way. We should reflect what society believes in.
Maybe I could clarify my question a little because given a rich heritage, given supply chain and distribution networks for newspapers, in the past, if we have that rich heritage, we have that supply chain, we can generate a certain level of distribution and reach instead of influence. Let's call it perhaps reach. But now we do see that sort of decouple because you have social media, and social media, you have a lot of players coming in to generate news as well. So what can we do to use our, be it earned legitimacy to drive greater distribution and to drive greater reach in future?
That is what we are doing. So one of the key measures for SPH as a group is the total reach of all our products. A single product will always have limited reach. So if I use our, say, Straits Times, they have a reach of about 45-50%. But Straits Times cannot be all things to all people. So I talk about serious news and lighter news, for example. For those who are looking for maybe lighter news, they may turn elsewhere. So within the group, we have new papers still. We have Storm. Similarly, for Chinese community, Zaobao's news and Xingming's news is very different, right? So essentially, this is where we look at different products, looking at different segments of audience. So that overall, as a group, we have that reach. And why is reach important? Advertising and revenues aside, those are important, of course. Without reach, no advertiser want to advertise with you. In order for us to fulfill our mission is to inform society, have an informed society. If we are not able to have that reach, you can say all you want. I have joked with my colleagues in the newsroom. I still have a copy of the Oxford Dictionary, hard copy, on my bookshelf. I think it must be at least 30 years old. I've not touched it probably in the last, 20, 25 years. No good being credible, truth, and so on, if you don't have reach. If people are not accessing you, not using you, it doesn't help. So to achieve our mission, reach is important. That is something that we are working on, which is why I mentioned earlier on, one of our major priorities is to look at being on multi-platforms, multi-formats.
And talk about driving reach, right, Yeng? How far does the key lie in quality journalism, particularly so when we're in the age of generative AI? I mean, I was looking at some articles published by Tech in Asia, one of our titles, and some of those articles are AI generated as well. Would titles under SPH Media then get reporters to focus more on features, insights that rely on their groundwork, their nose for news, rather than getting them to run or to focus on day-to-day diary events?
If I go back to audience, again, for one of a better descriptor, there are those who are interested in serious news. There are others who prefer lighter news. So actually, I wouldn't underestimate the value of what you had called day-to-day diary events. The way our publications, whether it's Zaobao, Straits Times, curate what has happened in the last 24 hours or what's happening ongoing, what is of less importance, what is of more importance. The actual curation of by itself actually is of value to a lot of people. There are a lot of people who can't afford to spend time reading what is going on all the time. But for someone to help put this together, and then I guess the term is you can separate the wheat from the chaff, helps very much. But that said, there are also those who look for deep insights. And those are the ones that your traditional, I guess you call it quality journalism, would kick in. I mentioned earlier on about connecting the dots, events that's happening. For many readers, they may not appreciate the implications, but our journalists, our editors, they have that overarching strategic view and they're able to do that, helping to make sense for people. These are all important. Ultimately, we should recognize that we have a fairly diverse audience. We should try to cater to the whole group of diverse audience. And I would define quality journalism a bit more broadly. I wouldn't underestimate the work that our journalists who just summarizing the news, collating it, choosing what to report, what to highlight, and what may not be so needle moving.
I see. And speaking of journalists, right, Yeng, appreciate it if we could talk about nurturing good journalists at SPH Media. There's an article published by the Business Times that was back in August 2022. It was called Time to Talk About Talent Retention in Singapore's Newsrooms. And in that article, it cited a 2022 survey done by media intelligence firm Media, where less than half of journalists surveyed would recommend their own careers to others. How can we change that, and how can we ignite, or in most cases, reignite that passion for news among journalists?
Well, I certainly hope we can reignite that. That's why one of my priorities is staff, our own people. What I guess the first point I would make is that when you look at different professions, whether they recommend to their own children, to their friends, I guess you have to look at it in context. Again, if I use an example from my previous life, we have very, very dedicated nurses in the hospitals, and the nurses, they are very mission-driven because they look after patients. They feel that they feel a meaning to the work that they do. But if you ask them whether would they recommend nursing to their daughter or their son or their friends, I leave the MOH to share the number, but I would say it's hard to say that everyone will, because they know the job is a tough one. But that said, they find meaning in the job. And every year we do get nurses coming in, enrolling and becoming very dedicated nurses. I would say the same thing of journalists. I in my last 6 months in SPH, I have had many occasions to engage. I have small lunches with our journalists. Many of them have that same kind of dedication, the same kind of sense of purpose and mission. The feeling that they are making a difference, making an impact. And I think journalism is one area where you really can make an impact. I shared with one group that, like it or not, whatever you report, because we are a publication of record, it goes to the National Archives, it becomes part of history, for good or for bad. So if you report badly, it goes to the part of history. If you report well, if you help to provide insights that the public didn't realize, or if you help to correct disinformation, misinformation, I mentioned like during COVID period, it makes a difference. If I have to drill down to what I think our journalists do, there are 3 words that we have been using. One is inform. Then the inform part is fairly straightforward. But I wouldn't undervalue the information mission, because what you choose to inform, how you choose to put it together, how you choose to be as balanced, objective is important. The other aspect is connect for our journalists, especially for our ethnic communities, helping them connect with each other, helping them connect with their roots. These are all important things. There's one part which I find very uplifting. I am quite sure our journalists do so as well, which is to inspire. If I look at just the last couple of months, there were a few articles that have really inspired me. There was one report, this chap who has been here stateless for many years. After the report, we are glad to say that he got his PR. He has some status. He don't have to worry about whether he can even apply to study, apply for work, and so on. Similarly, there was one recent one about fathers who have been incarcerated in jail and their kids, how to connect with fathers. So some of these things are actually very inspiring.
Yes.
And I think for journalists, it's not about I get a global award because I have this investigative report. It's also about what difference you make to the lives of others. And this impact is something which I think help to drive our journalists. So when I look at quality journalists, I define it fairly broadly. Ultimately, for SPH as a group, how our audience see us, how the public assesses us, what rating they give us, that determines whether we are delivering or not delivering.
And to this end, we talked about how journalism is something that you have the fire in you, you want to do certain things, and you seek meaning in the job. How far then is journalism an apprenticeship business? How can we train and retain younger entrants to become good journalists? And besides creating meaning, right, what defines a good journalist in this day and age?
I think it's a combination of both. I have seen editors who have done a very good job mentoring new journalists. Actually, the way you craft the language is a wonderful thing. Obviously, I'm not an expert in language, but the way you can bring across a point by the way you craft a statement, the kind of headlines that you can craft to get the point across in a very succinct way. All these are a bit of an art. In fact, language is an art. for this, actually, the seniors do play an important role in mentorship. At the same time, because we are in a digital media world now, so it's no longer the old days when it's just print. I think for many decades, we didn't have to move with times that much. But in the digital world, you have to move with times. So whether you're senior or junior, you have to learn about how the world is changing, how the digital media industry is changing, how your audience are changing. And this is where, whether you are young, you are old, I think everyone have to learn. And I hope this is something that they will learn together and they will work together.
And Yeng, at the end of the day, as we wrap up the conversation, where do we at SPH Media want to go as a company in the next 5 to 10 years? What are some future plans for 2025 alone? What can we look forward to at the various titles?
Okay, I wouldn't say just 5 to 10 years, I hope forever. Straits Times is celebrating 180 years this year. I would like to believe that there will be a bicentennial, there will be a tricentennial. But ultimately, if I have to put it in one phrase, that our products, SPH Media as a group, we are the go-to source whenever the public, Singaporeans in particular, want to have information that they can trust. They want to have insights for which on their own they may not be able to derive. They come to us. They come to one of our products. When they are looking at connecting with their community, they come to us, one of our products.
I see. Lots to watch indeed, and thanks so much for the insights, Yeng. That was Chan Yeng, CEO of SPH Media. Thank you so much for joining us on Money FM 89.3.
Thank you, Tian Tian. It's been my pleasure. I will listen to Money FM more often.
Thank you so much for the support.
Before acting on the information on Money FM, please consider if it's suitable for your own investment objectives, financial situation, and risk tolerance. To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.